And I'm just very excited for Starmer to be essentially the strongest leader in the G7. It's not just that Biden has cognitive decline, he's teetering on a brink of power.
Welcome to Global Dispatches, a podcast for the foreign policy and global development communities and anyone who wants a deeper understanding of what is driving events in the world today. I'm your host, Mark Leon Goldberg. I am a veteran international affairs journalist and the editor of UN Dispatch. Enjoy the show. The Labour Party won an overwhelming victory in recent elections in the United Kingdom. Keir Starmer is now Prime Minister, ending 14 years of Conservative rule in the UK. So what does this mean for Britain's foreign policy? Can we expect any major changes to Britain's relationship to the world? Joining me to discuss the foreign policy implications of the UK elections is Jason Peck, host of the Disorder podcast. We have an extended discussion of the new Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, who Jason Peck argues will have an outsized role in shaping UK foreign policy for years to come. This includes reorienting and reinvigorating Britain's once-vaunted global development programs. This is a great episode. I always love speaking with other podcasters, so do be sure to check out Jason Peck's Disorder podcast, and it's put out by the same group in the United Kingdom that also puts out the very popular The Rest is Politics podcast. Now here is my conversation with Jason Peck, host of the Disorder podcast. So, Jason, just to start, what should people in the foreign policy and international affairs community who congregate around Global Dispatches, what should they know about Keir Starmer?
Keir Starmer is a fundamentally good man. Many people have maligned him as boring, but for me, he is messianic in his non-messianicness and charismatic in his lack of charisma. After about 8 years of charlatans, charismatic reality TV prime ministers and presidents on both sides of the Atlantic, we have a solid, good technocrat who worked as a lawyer for people's human rights. He has led the Labour Party in purging its anti-Semites, and he has pulled that party from the post-Marxist socialist fringe towards the center. He's a good man. He has some flaws, but I put my faith in him.
And I mean, is there like a foreign policy vision that he embraces? Is it just kind of conventional transatlanticism, multilateralism? And believe me, conventional is not a problem here. Conventional is perfectly fine. Is there anything like of note on the foreign policy front that would distinguish him or that you would cite as being particularly relevant?
Sure. I think it's important to understand about Sir Keir that, as he loves to say, his father was a tool maker, and then he got interested in the law from a human rights and justice perspective, but he's not someone who cares about foreign policy. Barack Obama was not particularly into foreign policy, but he had at least grown up in Indonesia. This is a guy who doesn't care about foreign policy and has had his entire professional career in England. Foreign policy is going to be set by David Lammy. Keir is not very concerned. The thing that he cared about foreign policy was that Corbyn was a pro-Putin, anti-Semitic, pro-Palestinian, pro-jihadi nutcase.
Jeremy Corbyn was the previous leader of the Labour Party that Keir Starmer effectively purged.
Correct. Who had a decent election result in 2017, but led the party to the most disastrous performance in the December 12th, 2019 elections that Labour has had in my lifetime. And Keir only cares about foreign policy in as much as having fringe positions against NATO, for Putin, for the jihadis, led labor into catastrophic defeat and infighting. So he wanted to bring it back to the Atlanticist center. However, what you said is, does he have an interesting doctrine? He appointed as his shadow foreign secretary a Caribbean British man by the name of David Lammy.
Yeah, that's a name I'm familiar with. He was like a young rising star 20 years ago in labor politics, if I recall. Now he's a bit older and his star has risen to the foreign minister.
Exactly. He's someone who knows Obama. He was at Harvard Law with some of the movers and the shakers in the US. But there really is a Lammy doctrine. I can share with your listeners the great New Statesman bio, and this is a magazine portfolio of Lammy that you might want to put in the show notes, because that really gets at what the foreign policy tenets will be.
So what is his doctrine? What is like a Lammy doctrine?
I think the key thing is that it's Atlanticist. It values the special relationship. It sees Britain close to its European allies. It wants to get closer to Europe. But then it sees Britain as advocating on behalf of the global South. He also is close to his Ghanaian ancestry, his Caribbean connections, and he wants Britain to leverage the diasporas that exist in London. And Ghana, Nigeria, India, Iran, these are places with very strong diasporas in London. He wants to bring them into the foreign policy making process, and not human rightsism for, let's hug some trees or save some, dying children. He wants to do it because it will increase Britain's soft power potential. And I think that combination of the global South, humanitarian, plus Britain's unique role in the world, that's going to be really special. And Lammy has that insider juice on American politics. It's not just that he went to Harvard. It's not just that he knows Obama. He understands the dynamics. These never Trumpers are neocon, and they like a kind of McCain style look at things. And these never Trumpers are arch conservatives, and they're this. I think he's a man who can step into the foreign policy role and really, really be switched on. And that isn't something that Britain has had in a long time.
So I want to sort of disaggregate those 2 points. Number one, his perhaps unique insights into the vagaries of American politics that other previous foreign secretaries have not had on the one hand, and on the other, this approach to the global South. So let's start with the first one. So how do you think he might steer like a British relationship, say, with a Trump presidency?
Well, he said a famous tweet before he was appointed shadow foreign secretary, just lambasting Trump as a moron. He's walked that back, and he's built relationships with Eldridge Colby, with some people on the right in Trump world, because he supports NATO. He wants to push for 2.5% of British GDP spent on NATO. He appreciates some of the neocon wing of the Republican Party, but he's always going to be on the outside of those circles. What I think he has is an ability to go back to where Britain was under Blair, as leveraging Britain's role in the world by being an auxiliary of American global ordering. These powers, particularly America and Britain, have done global ordering from the end of the Napoleonic Wars until 2011. And then we've lost our way. We weren't coordinated well, and we also didn't work well with our allies. Lammy is a guy who gets you got to have the Anglo-American relationship as the key thing, whether it's what arms the Ukrainians need, or like, should we not announce as Britain that we support a Palestinian state until we're on board with the Americans? He gets all of that. And of course, he's going to be to the left wing of even a democratic foreign policy, right? They've committed in their manifesto to recognizing a Palestinian state, and they've come out of the gate with stuff against Netanyahu and that they are going to enforce the ICC warrant. He's a European politician with European kind of social pressures on him, but he also gets the transatlantic relationship.
So on this question of the UK's relationship to the global South, and maybe to global development more broadly, One of like the key trends over the last, I would say, 5 years or so is that the UK went from being a real shining example in the global development community. The Department for International Development, as it was known, was really like renowned for its expertise, for being able to do like really innovative global development solutions at scale. It was like the development agency that everyone looked up to. And beyond that, the UK under David Cameron was able to increase its percentage of GDP that it spent on foreign development assistance to, what you folks in the UK called 0.7%. But since 2020, DFID was basically dissolved and morphed into the Foreign Office. Basically, like the aid office was dissolved into the Foreign Office.
Yep, and it went from being the FCO to the FCDO.
Yeah, that's a Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. And meanwhile, the share of Britain's GDP that goes to aid has diminished significantly. So you went from this like shining a global example of how to do global development right to being something that is completely denuded in its ability to do global development. But you're saying that David Lammy has a plan for that, which is interesting to me.
That was really well sketched there, Mark. Britain is no longer a superpower. It's a medium power, but it has the international connections of a superpower. How do I mean? The US, Russia, and China have embassies in pretty much every country, and they have core equities, political and economic, with every country. Well, Britain and France are medium powers that also have core equities with every country, but Britain has even more. The British elites have gone to school with Gulfi leaders. The Gulfi leaders have their, vacation houses in the UK. They race their thoroughbreds at Ascot. There are these social connections that Britain has, not only with the wealthy countries of the Gulf, but African dictators send their kids to school in the UK. That was all leveraged for the development budget and to know the right people and to use the Nigerian Brits who have these connections. It was a real shame that since Brexit, Britain has not only lost its way in foreign policy with the EU, but it lost its way in development policy primarily in Africa, where, keep in mind, it colonized no fewer than one third of the countries there. Lammy is committed to using those ties of Commonwealth, those ties of language, and the ties of the diasporas from those countries being in the UK to make Britain a development superpower. And that's something that the US can't do because we have military and counter jihadi and intelligence equities with these countries. So it's very difficult to prioritize the development relationship. Britain can do that. It could be like a more powerful and more connected Sweden.
Yeah. Or Norway. Yeah.
Which is something that the US can't do.
So, I mean, is there like a concrete plan to get the share of GDP that goes to development assistance back to 0.7%? Is that like in the...
It's in the manifesto. It's going to happen.
Okay.
I can't say if they're going to do it well or poorly. I have hope. I think that Lammy is a capable person. I really, as I said, I find Keir messianic for me. I think that they are going to be adrift because the world is so disordered now. There's going to be another mega bomb exploding in Kiev, and then Netanyahu is going to violate some ceasefire, and then we never know what's going to happen. So it's really difficult to prioritize building, some school in Namibia and having a women's health clinic in Burma, because it's a much more disordered world than when Britain was doing this stuff in the 1990s and 2000s. But they're going to try to do it to rebuild British soft power. And all I can say is all the power to them.
I mean, is there like bureaucratically at least a plan to undo the merger of the DFID to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, or is that just like a done deal? There's no way to undo what has been done there.
You're taking me beyond my competency here, Mark. I don't really work on the institutional politics of the FCDO, so I don't know the answer to that question. I assume not, though, because it's so much easier to break than it is to recreate. So I think that this is already a done deal. DFID has been broken as an institution. People rotate from a DFID posting into an economic posting within the FCDO. They no longer have that separate expertise.
Mm-hmm.
So I just doubt that it's going to come back. What I think he is going to do is use more of the FCDO to work on development issues, and they're going to prioritize, particularly in places like Africa and Southeast Asia, the development component of Britain's equities with these countries. And that's all to the good because it then may allow Britain to play more of a mediating role. What I advocate for Britain to do is to do the convening. America has hard power, but it's very difficult to convene. Like, we can't convene the Qataris, the Egyptians, and the Israelis in a truly neutral way about the hostages, about post war governance of Gaza, because America is biased and we have so much connection with the Israelis and then we have our base in Qatar and whatever. The British have core equities with these countries, but they could be more neutral. And I hope that they use that. They're never going to be Switzerland, but they're more neutral than America while having this medium power status.
So, on this question of not being able to unbreak things that have been broken, how does the UK's relationship to the European Union change from here on out? I take it there's no undoing Brexit, at least that's not in the offing in the immediate future. So, how might a Labour government approach Europe in any meaningfully different way?
That is the $64,000 or $64 trillion question.
Or pound.
I would like to see some stealth ordering. In other words, now that he came in with a 100+ seat majority, just to try to get into the European Economic Community, to try to get some freedom of movement back, it wouldn't necessarily need to be a stealth referendum, but to cozy up to Europe. However, in the manifesto, they committed to not do that. And for Americans out there, it's very weird, but British political parties commit themselves to their policies before they get into power by issuing these manifestos during the campaign. I don't love it as a practice, but it makes it very difficult to do things that are not in the manifesto. And the B word has become like a 4-letter word. In other words, they don't talk about it. They don't want to relitigate it. And even though the vast majority of Labour supporters were Remainers, about 20% voted for Brexit on the left, the Jeremy Corbyn style socialist Brexit. And I hope he's going to do some stealth ordering because I think that Keir is a rigorous pragmatist. He did everything. He said everything about fighting Corbyn on anti-Semitism, about being moderate in this way and that way. And then as soon as he's in power, he's going to recognize the Palestinian state and he's going to change Britain positions. I hope he can cozy up to Brussels and try to do at least regulatory alignment. One of the things that he said he is committed to is respecting the ICC, the ICJ, the European Court of Human Rights, the European Court of Justice, the ECJ, and those things are going to make the Europeans like him. And then maybe we can build off of that to trying to have more trade relations. People talk about alignment, standards alignment. Like, you start with something silly like veterinary alignment. What are the standard checks that you need to be able to take your pet on your European holiday when you cross the channel? That sounds like not much of a big deal, but then you build on that. What is it to get the foreign exchange programs going again so that 18-year-olds don't need to have a visa to go study in France? Then you build on these things slowly. And I hope he's going to do that because Britain is in Europe geographically. Britain is in Europe economically. It needs to have its primary geopolitical ties be with the EU.
So, in the coming weeks, are there any key moments, key inflection points you'll be looking towards that will suggest to you how the new Starmer government may approach foreign policy?
Well, it's happening as we speak, Mark. Starmer is in DC now. His first foreign trip as prime minister. And it's the big one. It's the NATO 75th anniversary bash. And they're discussing, a pathway to Ukrainian membership. But most importantly, because NATO countries are seated alphabetically, he sits next to Biden because the United States and UK are next to each other in the alphabet. And he's going to be shoulder to shoulder with Biden, projecting centrist dad vibes. And you have to keep in mind that Pennsylvania and Scranton translates into a British guy with a working class accent whose father moved to Surrey and made tools. He is just a younger Biden. So when he's there, Starmer, sitting with Biden, he's showing America all of the vibes of how to defeat neopopulists and to do global leadership. And I'm just very excited for Starmer to be essentially the strongest leader in the G7. It's not just that Biden has cognitive decline, he's teetering on a brink of power. And Olaf Scholz has really screwed up his relationship with the CDU. Macron, barely held on in his election. Starmer is the one who's got 5 years in unchecked power. So I think that he's going to be quite powerful when he's talking about how should we have a path for Ukraine to join or not? How should we deal with the Baltic countries? How should we train Ukrainian soldiers? And when he says that Britain is going to recognize Palestine, but only if, for example, they give back the hostages, or only if this, it really has a lot of force because he has the most stability of any G7 leader.
So, I mean, that's interesting to me. As you describe Starmer today, if Trump is indeed elected in November, it seems that he might fill a role similar to what Angela Merkel filled, 5-6 years ago, being like the most stable liberal international leader during a time of great chaos and threats to the liberal order that Trump posed. And I mean, you look around the world right now, Trudeau's in trouble, Macron's in trouble, like you just mentioned Scholz, but Starmer is a pragmatic centrist, and he's going to be there for 5 years. So that's really interesting to see history repeat itself in a way.
That's exactly right, Mark. Germany always had a little bit more economic and export power, but Britain has cultural capital, from making movies to having embassies in all these different countries. But the key thing here is that Starmer has this 150 plus seat majority. He's in for 5 years no matter what. And Britain is a place where if you have that kind of majority, there isn't much checks and balances. Keep in mind that there's no Supreme Court. There's no differentiation between the legislative and the executive. He's controlling things, and he can present a moral center and counterbalance as Trump gets off course. And hopefully he can rally the Europeans to do more coherent European defense. Yes, the French always want to lead on European defense, but Britain at that point will have the only sane nuclear bomb in NATO, because the French don't allow their nuclear arsenal to be controlled by NATO, but the British do. And therefore, if Trump is off the reservation and not willing to defend Ukraine in a certain way, the British can. And I think that the nuclear aspect and the connection to NATO means that he will be an even stronger voice for the free centrist world that respects international institutions than Merkel ever was, because the Germans don't deploy force and they don't have nuclear. So he's the man with a plan, and I put my faith in him.
Jason, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate this.
It's been a real pleasure to be with you.
Thanks for listening to Global Dispatches. The show is produced by me, Mark Leon Goldberg. It is edited and mixed by Levi Sharp. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure to follow the show and enable automatic downloads to get new episodes as soon as they're released. On Spotify, tap the bell icon to get a notification when we publish new episodes. And of course, please visit globaldispatches.org to get on our free mailing list, get in touch with me, and access our full archive. Thank you.